My name's Tony. I'm an addictive eater.
Hi, Tony.
As Kate said, it's lovely to be here. We're on this fabulous holiday, but to be honest, when we're looking at our itinerary, this was always going to be the highlight. To be here today with you at this workshop. So I remember when I first came to Scotland over 15 years ago, I was in Alcoholics Anonymous, so I wasn't drinking, but the normal traveller, comes to Scotland to look at castles and lochs and glens, and I was coming to Scotland in pursuit of the deep fried Mars bar and cans of Earn Brew, because I'm totally obsessed with food. I'm in this other fellowship, not drinking and drugging through the grace of God, but not sober. So not only was I still in active addiction, to a substance, all those character defects and all those aspects of life that I thought would get better with not drinking were actually getting worse. The selfishness, the self-centeredness, the fear, the anxiety, and that's what I've had. That's what I had all my life. So I was born with that, and I believe that's the disease of addiction. And food was the first thing I turned to take the edge off it. And right from the start, I was obsessed with food. And my story is no different to anyone else's in the sense that I ate burnt food, frozen food off other people's plates, out of rubbish bins. I stole food. I did, anything to get my fix to feel better. And then later on in life, in my teens, then came alcohol and later on drugs and pills. So, but food was always there. For 42 years of my life, it was the obsession was was sort of driving me. And I first went to a meeting of a 12-step recovery fellowship for addictive eaters about 32 years ago, and I thought I was going there for professional reasons because I'm a journalist, and I thought this will make a great story. And by that stage, I'd done the full gamut of weight loss organisations, exercise, trying to control my weight because I thought that was the problem. And I'd had to give up sport, which I loved, because as a consequence of my addiction, because I got an injury through not being fit, and that was the end of my end of my football. And that just fueled the feeling of uselessness and self-pity that Kate talked about, and the poor me. So how did I deal with that? I ate and drank and drugged more. So the self-loathing was always there. So I saw this advertisement in the paper for this fellowship, and I thought that'll make a great story. And I imagined going there and people telling their before and after stories, and kind of holding up trousers that the size of a circus tent that they once wore, and because that's what I was used to in those weight loss organisations. And I went there, and there were people talking about being obsessed with food, having a physical craving, not being able to stop once they started eating. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe people were actually that candid and were talking about the things that I was struggling with. And I'd absolutely love to say that it made such a great impression on me that I've been coming ever since. But that's not my story. The self-will in me was so strong that it was 17 years before I went back to that meeting. And by that stage, I'd been in Alcoholics Anonymous for 13 years. And as I said, not sober, abstinent from alcohol, but not and drugs, but not sober in the sense that the food was getting worse and worse. And so I kind of credit that first visit to the Northern Hemisphere as a bit of a turning point, really, in the sense that I was over in France and managed through kind of one of my character defects, which was lust. Ended up in a bar scam situation, which cost me $1,200 New Zealand, so £600 to extricate myself from. And I remember feeling, what sort of behaviour is this for somebody who's been sober in inverted commas in Alcoholics Anonymous for 13 years? And I just had this overwhelming sense that I was as powerless over food as I was over alcohol, and that I needed to go to the fellowship to get help. And I needed to go to the meetings. I had been coming in and out over the years. I didn't do what Kate was talking about. I didn't keep coming. But I'd dip in and out of meetings, and I'd hear something I didn't like, which was usually, to get well, you have to give up the food, and I'd be out the door again, like it was the doors of that fellowship were swinging like a, sort of doors in a saloon, kind of, and I knew, and I particularly avoided people who are getting well, and there was all these conditions I had around, if I ever go back there, I won't get a sponsor, I won't get a food plan, I won't do this, I won't do that, So while I had that attitude that I won't, or I had the attitude that I can control this, I was never going to get anywhere. So it just had to get bad enough, really, and sort of, I mean, it was physically obvious that I was an addictive eater because I was obese, but it was more the emotional and mental and spiritual kind of pain, really, that kind of made me realise on that trip that I wasn't sober at all, and I couldn't wait from that point. I kept eating for the rest of that trip, but I couldn't wait to get home to get back to meetings of the fellowship, and when I did come back, there were 2 people still from that very first meeting, and in the mid 1980s there, and a heck of a lot more people who I'd watched get well in AA, and so I knew they had something that I didn't have, and but the self will was still so strong that I still tried to do it myself for a few months, and I remember buttonholing some poor member at a meeting, lunchtime meeting. There were just 2 of us there, and I thought, right, I'm going to ask her what her food plan is, because I thought the answer was in the food plan. So she told me her food plan. I went back to the office and I wrote it down, and I had her breakfast and her lunch, but a free choice dinner. So from the moment I woke up in the morning, I was thinking about that dinner. Like it was just, it was like a, sort of a one loop track. Sort of, well, you had Indian last night, so maybe Chinese, and sort of, you had a lot last night, maybe a bit. It was just like, it was terrible. Like just the way the thinking was. And so eventually, I went up to somebody and who'd been at that first meeting, and who'd come around to my house on a 12-step call and had said that if I wanted to get well, I'd have to give up eating, drinking, drugging. And I went up to her and said, how do you think it would work if I kept my main sponsor in AA and got a food sponsor here? And she said, well, knowing you, Tony, it wouldn't work at all, and just turned and walked away. So I brooded about that for a week, kind of, how we get, hurt and sort of, I never remember making a decision to go up and ask her to sponsor me, but the next week at the end of the meeting, I couldn't wait to speak to her. I was up on my feet. I walked across the room. I can still picture the area in the room where I talked to her, and I mean that venue's gone now. It was destroyed in the earthquakes we had, and so I said, will you help me? And she said, well, are you entirely ready to give up your old thinking around food? And I said, not 100% sure, but I think I am. I can't do it. I just can't do it. So she said, ring me at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And again, I couldn't wait to, it was very unusual for me to be up early on a Saturday morning, but I was up hours earlier than that, waiting for 10 o'clock so I could call. It was like I was gifted a willingness that had never been there before. And from that point, where I was told what I had to do, all the things that I said I wouldn't do, I ended up saying, yep, that'll be fine, yep, happy to do that, sort of, I couldn't believe it. It was like an out-of-body experience, like, because I was a yes butter, especially the butter, actually, but kind of, it was, I was trained to question things and debate things and kind of, but when my sponsor told me what I needed to do around the food, around meetings, around working the steps, I was, yep, that'll be fine. And since that day, no matter what, good and bad, I haven't had to eat, and I absolutely know that that's not me doing that. It's definitely a power greater than me. I'm hoping one day that same higher power will remove the desire to think, but that hasn't happened yet. But it's a work in progress. But so basically, all that old thinking I had, I kind of had to let go of, and one of my old thinkings was, when I first went to that meeting all those years ago, I opened the door very gingerly, looked inside, couldn't see any men there. So my thinking was so warped, I thought, this is a woman's problem. Some of my friends, had read a book, Fat is a Feminist Issue, and I thought, yes, yeah, that's right. And so So I was looking, Kate said, she was taught to listen for the similarities, not the differences. I was looking for the differences all the time. So two of the great feeders of my denial were gender and also, well, the program's the same as AA. I'll just go there and I'll work my recovery there. Well, I can't. I've never been able to do that. I have to be around recovering addictive eaters, and I have to have a sponsor. I can't sponsor myself as I did for years in the other program. And today, the more I do those things, the more I want to do them too. Which it's. I heard at one of those, it was like the cotton wool that came out of the ears. And at one of those early meetings, I heard someone say that they'd developed the willingness from doing, from taking action. So I've tried to do that over the years. I certainly feel that surrender is a massive part of my recovery, and that there are levels of surrender. So I'm surrendered around food and other substances, but still willful in other areas. Particularly around sleep and kind of tardiness and kind of. So some of the character defects are still there, but it's got a lot better. And what I'm really pleased with is that a lot of that old thinking is kind of no longer there. And so I believe today that I've given up all right, like it says in the story in the big book, to chemical peace of mind. I now know the difference between kind of abstaining from a substance and sobriety. And so from that first meeting that I came back to, I got hope because I saw that there was a room full of people who were in recovery, and some of them by that stage have been in recovery over 20 years. So I knew this program worked. And what I get hope from today is that I see people just getting better all the time. Through people who've been around years, and what impresses me is their willingness to share the difficulties that are happening now as well as the past. So it kind of proves to me what someone told me in AA when I first came in, that there's no limit to how far you can go in this program because there's no limit to God. So it's as long as I'm not picking up the first one, coming to meetings, keeping in touch with my sponsor, trying to work the steps to the best of my ability on any given day, and trying to help another, then I'm keeping in conscious contact with my higher power, and there's a chance that a lot of those things that are still character defects will get better in time. So it's lovely to be here, and it's lovely to see this fellowship flourishing on both sides of the world, and I'm sure next time that we're back here that there'll be even more people in this room, and I just think that it's an absolute privilege to be in a fellowship that we no longer have to look over our shoulder, and that we're very clear in the message of what constitutes recovery and sobriety, and so thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thanks, Tony.